Get off my property before I call the sheriff." The words cut through the humid Iowa air like a blade. Dale Henderson, third-generation farmer and proud owner of 400 acres of prime cornfield, stood with his chest puffed out and his finger jabbing toward a weathered old man holding what looked like a metal detector. The man, slight and gray-haired, stood calmly in the middle of Henderson's field, his khaki pants dusty from the Iowa soil. "I said get out!" Henderson's voice rose an octave. The old man didn't flinch. He just looked at the farmer with eyes that had seen things Henderson couldn't imagine, and quietly said, "Sir, I need to be here. It's important." Henderson's face reddened. "Important? You're trespassing on my land with some treasure-hunting toy. I don't care if you're looking for Civil War buttons or spare change. You're leaving now, or I'm pressing charges. If you believe our veterans deserve respect no matter how old they get, type honor in the comments." Kenneth Price had been called many things in his 68 years. Soldier, specialist, patriot. But trespasser was new, and it stung more than he expected. He'd driven 600 miles from his small apartment in Maryland to this spot, guided by coordinates he'd memorized 51 years ago, numbers that still woke him up at night sometimes. The metal detector in his hands wasn't from a hobby shop. It was military-grade equipment he'd borrowed through channels that still existed for men like him, men who'd done things that would stay classified for another generation at least. His hands, gnarled with arthritis now, gripped the device with the same certainty they'd held it in 1974 when he was Specialist Kenneth Price, United States Army, assigned to a unit that didn't exist in any official record. Back then, this wasn't Henderson's cornfield. It was designated Federal Emergency Site Delta 7, one of dozens of locations across the Midwest where the government buried insurance policies against scenarios that kept presidents awake at night. Henderson's boots crushed the corn stalks as he advanced. "You deaf old man? I gave you a chance to walk away nice. Now I'm calling the cops." He pulled out his phone, already dialing. Kenneth didn't move. He'd faced down situations that would make this angry farmer wet himself, but you couldn't say things like that. Not anymore. Not when your service record was sealed behind walls of national security classifications. "Sir, please," Kenneth tried again, his voice carrying that particular quiet authority that men who truly served never quite lost. "I'm not treasure hunting. There's something here that needs to be recovered. It's government property. It's dangerous." Henderson laughed, actually laughed, a harsh bark that showed he thought he was dealing with a senile old fool. "Government property in my cornfield? What, did aliens land here too? Maybe JFK's buried under my barn?" He pressed the phone to his ear. "Yeah, sheriff's office. I got a trespasser on my property. Some old guy with a metal detector refusing to leave. Corner of my north field off County Road 17. "Yeah, I'll wait." Kenneth closed his eyes for a moment. He'd hoped it wouldn't come to this. The quiet way would have been better. Locate the cache, mark it, call his contacts, get the recovery team out here without fanfare. Now there would be questions, explanations, forms. He was too old for this. The beeping of his detector suddenly quickened, the tone shifting. He was close, 20 feet, maybe less. His heart rate picked up despite himself. After 5 decades, it was still here, still buried 8 feet down in its concrete vault, wrapped in protective casings that should have held, but might not have. That was the problem with Cold War infrastructure. They'd built for 30 years of contingency, not 50. Corrosion was a concern now. Leakage. Things that could poison groundwater. Or worse. Henderson's voice drilled into his thoughts. "Don't you dare take another step. The sheriff's coming, and unless you want to spend tonight in a cell, you better—" "Mr. Henderson." Kenneth's voice finally rose, surprising both of them. "What's buried here is a weapons cache. Chemical and conventional ordnance. Cold War era. If it's compromised, if there's been any groundwater intrusion, any corrosion, you and your family could be in danger. Your livestock, your neighbors. Henderson's face went from red to purple. Now you're threatening me. Making up some insane story about weapons. You're not just trespassing, you're mentally unstable. He took an aggressive step closer. My grandpa farmed this land. My father farmed this land. I farmed this land for 30 years. There ain't nothing buried here but dirt and rocks and the roots of the corn that feeds my family. Whatever games you're playing, old man, they're over. Kenneth could see it in Henderson's eyes. There would be no reasoning. The farmer had made up his mind. This was his land, his kingdom, and some old man with a detector wasn't going to tell him what was under his own soil. Kenneth had seen this kind of certainty before, usually right before reality came crashing through it like a freight train. He'd tried. When the sheriff came, he'd try again. And if that didn't work, well, his contacts had said they'd send backup if he confirmed the location. Backup was probably already on the way. The file on Delta 7 had been upgraded to active recovery status 3 months ago when the satellite thermal imaging showed anomalies. The government wanted this cache secured before the containment failed completely. The dust cloud appeared on County Road 17 within 10 minutes, but it wasn't a sheriff's cruiser. It was 3 black SUVs moving fast, the kind of fast that meant somebody was serious. Henderson saw them too, his expression shifting from triumph to confusion. Who the hell? The vehicles pulled off the road directly into Henderson's field, crushing corn stalks under heavy-duty tires without hesitation. Doors opened before the SUVs fully stopped. Men and women emerged wearing FBI windbreakers over tactical gear, and Kenneth recognized the lead agent immediately. Sarah Chen, 30 years younger than him, but wearing the same expression he'd seen in mirrors when he'd worn the uniform. "Mr. Henderson?" Chen called out, her ID already raised, her voice carrying absolute authority. "I'm Special Agent Chen, FBI. We're here regarding this property." Henderson's mouth worked soundlessly for a second. "FBI? What? I just called about a trespasser." Chen walked directly to Kenneth, her expression softening fractionally. "Mr. Price, good to see you again, sir. You found it?" Kenneth nodded, lifting his detector. "Delta 7 is confirmed. Signal strong. 8 feet down, 20 feet northeast from this position." Chen turned to Henderson, and her voice became formal, clipped, the voice of someone delivering news that would change everything. "Mr. Henderson, I need you to listen carefully. In 1974, this land was federal property, designated as Emergency Site Delta 7. The Department of Defense, under classified Cold War protocols, buried a contingency weapons cache at this location. Specialist Kenneth Price, United States Army, was a part of the team that secured that cache. She pulled out a tablet, swiping to display a declassified document marked with enough official seals to paper a wall. The cache contains conventional small arms, ammunition, and chemical crowd control munitions designed for civil emergency scenarios. The casings were rated for 30-year integrity. We're now at 51 years. Satellite thermal imaging detected a containment breach 3 months ago. If those chemical munitions corrode fully and leach into your groundwater table, this entire section, your farm, your neighbors' farms, the watershed feeding into the creek system, becomes a Superfund site. Henderson's face had gone from purple to white. There's weapons buried in my field." "Not just weapons," Kenneth said quietly. "CS gas canisters, smoke munitions with corrosive compounds, things that made sense in 1974 when we thought we might need to maintain order during a Soviet first strike. Things that are poison now if they leak." Chen gestured to her team, who were already unloading equipment from the SUVs, ground-penetrating radar units, hazmat suits, containment gear. "Mr. Henderson, under the Federal Emergency Management Act and the National Defense Authorization Protocols, this property is now a federal recovery site. You and your family will need to evacuate to the hotel we've arranged in town. You'll be compensated for lost crops and any containment procedures. But right now, I need you to step back and let us work." Henderson looked like a man watching his world tilt sideways. He turned to Kenneth, and the anger had drained out of him completely, replaced by something like shock and maybe the first hint of shame. You really did bury weapons here." Kenneth met his eyes steadily. 19 sites across 7 states. I was 23 years old, following orders that made sense at the time. We were told we might lose the country in a weekend, that we needed emergency supplies cached where military units could access them during breakdown scenarios. We went where the government owned land or had arrangements. Most of those sites have been recovered over the years. Delta 7 got overlooked. Wrong file system, missing records. When the thermal imaging caught the breach signature last quarter, someone finally pulled my old mission files. He paused. I volunteered to come confirm the location. I knew the coordinates, didn't know it was private property now. Henderson swallowed hard, his throat working. Jesus, I almost had you arrested. I called you an old man with a toy, Kenneth finished, not unkindly. I know how it looked, how I look. He gestured at himself. The worn clothes, the arthritis-bent fingers, the cheap metal detector that hid military-grade electronics. Nobody sees Specialist Price anymore. They just see Kenneth, the 68-year-old who probably watches too much History Channel. Chen stepped between them, her voice gentler now. "Mr. Henderson, Specialist Price has been working with us for 3 months on site identification. There are 17 more like him across the country, Cold War veterans helping us locate and secure sites before they become hazards. They don't get medals for this. They don't get parades. Most people don't even know they exist. But without them, we'd be hunting blind for buried time bombs." She looked at Kenneth with something like reverence. Mr. Price drove from Maryland on his own dime because he remembered the coordinates and didn't want anyone hurt. He could have let us search for months. Instead, he came here, knowing he might face exactly what he faced. Disbelief, anger, accusation. He came anyway. Henderson's hand came up slowly, tentatively, extended toward Kenneth. "Sir, I apologize. I didn't know. I couldn't have known, but that doesn't excuse how I spoke to you." Kenneth looked at the offered hand for a long moment, then took it. The grip was firm despite Henderson's shock. "You were protecting what's yours," Kenneth said simply. "I respect that. Your grandpa, your father, you built something here. I was just the ghost of something your grandpa probably never knew existed." He smiled faintly. Cold War was full of secrets. Some of them are still coming to light. Chen's team was setting up a perimeter now, orange hazmat cones marking the work zone, while others assembled the portable containment unit that would encase the vault once they excavated. It would take days, maybe a week. Henderson would watch from his farmhouse as men in protective suits carefully exhumed concrete and steel from his cornfield, as machinery lifted a vault that had been silent beneath his family's crops for 5 decades. He'd see the containers brought up, each marked with symbols that were old when he was born, each handled with the care reserved for sleeping serpents. And he'd think about the old man with the metal detector, the one he'd almost had arrested, the one who'd buried these serpents as a young soldier following orders in a world that lived under the shadow of mushroom clouds. The sun was setting over the Iowa cornfield when Kenneth finally set down his detector. Chen had taken his statement, documented his site confirmation, and arranged for his hotel room into town. Tomorrow he'd be here again, consulting as they began excavation, answering questions about burial protocols and vault construction from men and women who weren't born when he dug this hole. But tonight, as the FBI erected temporary lighting and began the preliminary site survey, Henderson approached him one more time. "Mr. Price," the farmer said, his voice stripped of all its earlier bluster, "would you Would you do me the honor of having dinner with my family tonight? I think my kids should meet you. I think I need to explain to them what I almost did today, what I should have done." Kenneth started to decline. He was tired. His arthritis was screaming, and he'd driven 600 miles that morning. But something in Henderson's face stopped him. It wasn't just apology. It was something deeper. Recognition, maybe. The understanding that what stood before him wasn't just an old man, but a living connection to a history that had happened right beneath his feet. "I'd be honored," Kenneth said quietly. As they walked toward Henderson's truck, the FBI's portable lights casting long shadows across the cornfield, Kenneth allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Delta 7 would be secured. The groundwater would stay clean. The families farming this land would never know how close they'd come to a silent poison. And maybe, just maybe, one Iowa farmer would remember that the worn exterior of an old veteran sometimes hides a history of service that deserves respect, not dismissal. Subscribe to my channel if you believe that respect should be given freely, especially to those who served in silence for our safety, whose missions we're only learning about decades later. Share this story if you think we need to look beyond appearances and listen when veterans speak, even when, especially when, what they're saying seems impossible. The Cold War might be over, but its echoes still sound in cornfields across America, and men like Kenneth Price are still standing watch, still making sure we're safe from the buried dangers we've forgotten. That's the kind of service that deserves honor, no matter how ordinary the uniform has become.